Okay, let's review really quick before we do the installation the tools that you will need to do your install on your MT-82 transmission. From right to left, you have a 3/4 inch box wrench, a 1/2 inch wrench, and make sure that you get a ratcheting box wrench like this. It makes it much easier to put the heat shield on. You're going to need at least an 18 inch extension. We are opting for two 10 inch extensions, but these will work fine, but one 18 inch extension will work. You need a 1/4 inch drive ratchet. You're going to need a 10 millimeter deep well socket. It has to be a deep well socket, it can't be a standard. And you're going to need a 1/2 inch deep well socket as well. Then you're going to need a 7/16 standard socket, not a deep well, and a 3/8 standard socket, not a deep well. We're going to need a nice sharp pair of scissors, and we're going to need a 3/16 hex driver, T-handle hex driver. And optional for mounting the shifter, it is not needed but it does make the job easier, is an impact driver with a 3/16 drive key. Those should be all the tools you'll need. I want to take some time to go over some of the key features and benefits of our MT-82 shifter over the OEM unit. The first, if you look in the back of the OEM shifter, you'll notice that the tail housing is supported by this rubber bracket, and it's very sloppy. It's actually held on with zip ties, and the rubber is very, very soft. It really is only supporting the shifter up and down. It's offering no lateral support to the shifter whatsoever. By contrast, the MGW unit has our new gold rear bushing bracket that actually slides very freely front to back for braking and accelerating, but offers virtually no movement left to right. We also have two durometer inserts. We'll slide this thing off the back and show you the inserts here. This is our street bracket insert, and it actually is designed with a softer durometer, much harder than the factory one, but a softer durometer absorbs noise and NVH, so you will get very, very little to any increase over the OEM shifter in the cabin. We also provide a bushing that is much harder durometer. This is the street one, and this is our track one. You can see it's very stiff. It's about 25 durometer points harder than our street bushing. It's for guys that are really hardcore track junkies. One of the other problems with the factory shifter, we'll go ahead and pop this piece off here, is the fact that the factory shifter has no return springs to the 3 to 4 gate. It solely relies on the return springs in the transmission, and our opinion is that they are just not strong enough. They are not, cutting it for really hard 2 to 3 shifts. So when you do that 2 to 3 shift, not only are you getting the deflection on the back like we talked about with this rubber bracket, but you're also getting no assistance to push you right into the 3rd gate on a hard upward shift. Again, by contrast, the MGW shifter is a complete unit. It has internal springs, so it's always biased to the 3 to 4 gate. It doesn't just flop around. So when you push it over to 1st and 2nd and release it, it pops right back. The third very important feature is the amount of support, and that is why, and we'll go ahead and get this box pulled apart here, and we'll show you the guts of the factory box. It has these little plastic retainers, and that is the support bushing for the center linkage rod. And here's the one in the front, same thickness. As you can see, that's not very much support, and we have found that under hard shifting, this entire bushing can deform and actually compress too much and allow the center rod to move left to right, up and down too much, and gives a very imprecise shift. MGW has decided, and currently we are the only manufacturer that offers this, we have decided to make an entire shifter mechanism including the lower billet box. As you can see, it has half moon bushings that support the top half and the bottom half of the linkage rod, and by contrast to the factory shifter, you see how much support it has, literally 3 times the amount of surface area on both the front and the rear portion of the linkage rod. We feel that those 3 things more than make up the differences that our shifter has to the competition, but in addition to that, we offer other things the other manufacturers do not. One of them is we manufacture our own custom shift boot that comes standard in the kit, and it works much better than the factory boot, because the factory boot, a lot of people don't realize, is actually the same boot that was been on the Mustang since 2005, and it doesn't work very well with the reverse lockout mechanism. It can actually pinch and bind. We've had several customers complain of that with their stock unit. We also provide sound plates that give just additional noise suppression in the cabin. And standard on our shifter now is also a stainless steel heat shield with a dynamic control heat shield plate material that adheres to the heat shield, and that mounts on the underside of the shifter. All these things, you know, make the shifter just a very complete package, and we feel that it has made the shifter, you know, so much more effective in every aspect over the OEM and even the competitors' offerings. Okay, let's get started taking the factory shifter out so we can put the MGW shifter in. First thing you want to do is put the parking brake on, make sure the car is in neutral. First step is to get the factory shift ball off, and I'm not going to lie, if you have a Boss 302, it may be extremely tight. You may have to resort to using a leather or rubber strap wrench, and in some cases you may actually destroy the shift knob or damage it taking it off. So just take caution in that, take your time. You may even be able to heat it up. We've already loosened this one for our removal to make it easy, so we'll just go right into it. Take the factory shift knob off, pop the rear glove compartment, open up the cup holder, put one hand in here, grab your fingers under here, and just carefully, firmly lift up. It pops right up. And look how we're doing this towards the front. You have two tabs right there. Lift up and slide out just a little to reach in. This panel has a little quick release tab here. You just push it in, it comes right out, and then the whole console lifts right off. Now if you have an upgrade interior that has the lighting feature, you may have to remove some of the switches underneath here and also a cigarette lighter plug, but for this one it's a Boss 302, there's nothing, you can just take the console out. Now we're just going to remove the sound dampening material, pop this little holder here off of this stud here. You've got a little plastic thing that sticks into there, and this whole connector, this was actually the plug that went into the traction control and hazard. Move that out of the way. Take this sound plate off. All this stuff's going to be reused, so set it aside, don't discard it. And we're just ready to take the shift boot off. Just pull up on it, grab it like that. You are not going to reuse this boot, so you can set it aside. Now you've exposed the shifter. You've got the 4 hex head bolts. We're going to use our 3/8 Allen wrench with one of our extensions. You don't need a real long one, just a 10 inch is plenty. Even a 6 or 8 inch for this would be good, but we've got our 10. And we're going to go ahead and remove these. Now you can only remove 3 of them. The one that's in this corner here, you can't access until you lower the car, but now that we're right here, we're going to go ahead and remove the first 3. So go ahead and take these out. You will not be reusing any of these bolts. MGW provides all brand new bolts for all the connection points, so you do not have to keep these bolts. Alright, we've got the bolts out, but the shifter, like I said, it's got one area right here that'll keep it in. You won't be able to pull it completely out until you take that bolt out. So let's get the car jacked up. We'll lower the rear bushing bracket, get the shifter down so we can get to that last bolt. Okay, we are now underneath the vehicle, and now we have the second extension so that we have a full 20 inches. Like I said, you need at least an 18-inch extension to reach up here. We're going to use our 10mm deep well socket. You have to have a deep well socket because of these studs that stick down way below the nut. So we've got one on each side, and we're just going to put them on and remove these 2 6mm hex nuts. These two hex nuts we will be reusing. We provide additional lock nuts to go in front of those, but these two hex nuts we will reuse, so set them aside. Once you get it off, you just want to grab the back of the shifter and pull down, and on one side, for assembly reasons, they have a little panel nut that you need to put your fingers up in there and pull down to release that. Once you get it off the studs, you just pry this rear bushing bracket off of the rear of the shifter and remove it. Okay, while we're under the car, right after we remove the rear bracket, we're going to go ahead and take the bolts off that remove the support arm. First thing we want to do is this little dust boot that's right here. I'm going to just go ahead and peel it off the little groove and push it back as far as we can. And then we can pull this whole thing down. It actually rotates up and down like this. Pull it down, let it rest on the drive shaft. We're going to take our ratchet with our 3/8 socket, and we're going to take these 3 quarter 20 bolts off. Once the third bolt is removed, the whole shifter is actually free from the support arm. The only thing holding it still to the car is the linkage arm that goes through the center, and we'll go back up to the top of the vehicle to get it removed. Okay, now we're back inside the vehicle so we can access that lower right-hand side bolt now. You just want to grab the shifter with your left hand or right hand, whichever way you want. Now we've got our 3/8 socket back on with one extension only. And while you're turning that, just hold on to the top of the shifter. And when it breaks loose, it'll just put the shifter top piece in your hand, and the box will just drop down onto the drive shaft. There we go. And just pull it up. Go ahead and take that bolt out. Now, we're going to go ahead, I'm going to show you real quick. You will reuse this little cup. So you want to go ahead and just take your thumbs and push on it and snap that little cup off. Set this aside, but this is going to snap onto the bottom of the MGW shifter. Okay, now we're going to reach down in here and we're going to pull off the 2 plastic pieces here and here. We'll set those aside. And then you just want to reach your hand in here and you want to lift the black linkage arm out, and it will have 2 of these bushings, one on the front, one on the back. They just slide off that way like that. Set that one aside. And then the one on the back is actually split. They're both split, but the one on the back you can't slide off. You can see here, this one you actually just spread apart and it pops right off in your hand. Okay. Now, carefully move the linkage arm and just try to get it over to the passenger side and let it drop down. That way you have room to maneuver the lower box up through the opening. And that's it. And I would take this time to go ahead and put the 2 bushings in the spots and put your 2 little plastic brackets back and set those aside with your stock components. Okay, the next step is we're going to prepare the lower box assembly. It comes assembled like this with the nuts and everything already assembled. We're just going to pop those all off so we can disassemble the box. Take all the lock washers And take the 1/4 inch ones off the side as well. And we want to go ahead and take that time right now. Take that apart. You want to take all these nuts and you want to go ahead and apply Loctite to all of those. You just take a little bit out and you just dab some in each one of those. You want to do that for all of the large ones as well as the 4 1/4 20 ones. So we'll put a little bit of blue Loctite just like that in all 4 of those when we're ready. Okay, we have a new design box. It's got new bushings, makes it much easier to assemble. You just want to make sure that you line these things up. Just eyeball and make sure that they're in line with each other, not rotated like that. And when they go into the car, basically will be like this. This is the rear part, and the linkage bar will lay in there like that. And then you just slide the top box on there. Be very careful when you slide it on there. Get it on there straight. If you try to get it on there cocked, then it won't go. Don't force it. You saw that it was assembled, so it obviously goes together. Just don't force it. Okay? And it just goes in there just like that, and you make sure that it slides back and forth like that. And we'll get up underneath the car and we'll show how to assemble it. Before we do, there's one other step I just want you to be aware of. That's why I took this linkage arm out. I'm sure you know when you weld stuff, you can occasionally get weld slag. I have installed several shifters where I've noticed that there was a little tiny like weld slag on the rod. You got to be careful of that. Feel all the way around. If you have any piece, it just pops off and they paint right over and it's stuck to it. What that can do is tear up the bushing. If you feel one on there, just take a little file or a piece of sandpaper and just smooth it out. Just run your fingers all the way across that. It'll be inside the car, but just check it out. Make sure it is very smooth all the way around. If you feel a little dimple or something or a little piece of weld particles on there, just either pick them off if they'll come off or use a file and smooth it out. Good. Okay, we're going to install the lower box assembly now from underneath the car. First thing we're going to do is we're going to position the upper half. That's the one that has the 2 rear support pins on it. And first thing is get the linkage arm out of the way by pushing it up and over onto the driver's side. And you want to take the support arm that's over on the driver's side, just lift it up until it touches the console. Get it up out of the way. And you see the drive shaft is thinner right here. Now if you have an aftermarket drive shaft that's much larger, you may have to install this from the top side of the vehicle or lower your transmission a little bit. Easier to do it from the top side of the vehicle. But for right now, since we have a stock car, what you do is you just want to position it, watch these 2 studs hanging down, slide it up around the drive shaft, bring it around so that the rear pins are pointing to the rear of the car, just like that. You just want to hold this in place with one hand while you lift the linkage rod up and lay the round part of the linkage. Be very careful right here. If you can zoom in right over here, make sure the rubber boot is out of the way. Pull it back with your fingers so it doesn't get pinched in between the 2 clamshell pieces. So you just hold that like that, and you see how I have my thumb and my fingers and I'm actually holding them together just like that. And you see how the rod is inside the half moon cutouts of the bushing. You just hold it in place. Now if you want to, you can actually slide this thing up and put it on the support arm like that, just to hold it in place. But you still have to keep your thumb on the rod to hold the rod in place. Now we're going to take the lower half, and the lower half you need to make sure that you have the half moon cut out like that, goes towards the front of the car, so the 2 studs actually point to the driver's side. And then still holding your thumb there, you just want to line up the 4 studs, wiggle it, take your time, don't try to force it. And there you go. And at this point, go ahead and pull it off of that support arm. And you just want to move it back and forth. If you look in the back there, you just want to make sure that the rod is sliding freely. It should not be binding in any way. You just slide it freely like that. Now this is very important. This makes this operation very easy. Now you want to just turn the whole thing. And if you want to come over here with the camera, you'll see where I actually have it cocked over to the passenger side so I can see the studs. Now, only thing I'm worried about are these two studs on the passenger side for right now. And we have it resting on the drive shaft so that the bottom clamshell cannot fall. See, I can actually let go with my hands now, and it's just resting like that. So all we want to do is, while it's resting there, is we're going to take a flat washer, a lock washer, and one of the 5/16 18 nuts with the Loctite on it, and we're going to carefully, without disturbing the box much, we're just going to get one of these nuts started. Just be careful not to push on the box. The box will stay where it's at. Get it started with your fingers. Then we're going to take our 1/2 inch. It's got to be a deep well socket because of the length of these threaded screws. And we're just going to very carefully, now at this point, you can reach up there and grab the box and hold it, but you actually don't even need to do that. If you go very slowly, it won't disrupt it. Once you get one of them tight, then you're home free because the thing can't remove or can't fall apart. So we're just going to get one of them tight, and you actually want to go ahead and tighten it very tightly. Now you'll see the box kind of torque, but if you look at the rear pins, it'll actually bear up against the side of the wall. You actually want to use that. You let that pin lock up against that, and you tighten it really tight, and go ahead and seat it. Now that box is completely seated. And the nice part about it is, because we have not connected it to the side support arm yet, I can move this box all around, and I can rotate it over to me so I can manipulate it to get all 4 of those washers and nuts on there. And it's completely trapped, as you can see, on the linkage arm now. I can move it around. I can get all the nuts on there easily, and that's what we're going to do now. Okay, once you have the 4 bottom 5/16 18 nuts tight, we're ready to take the box assembly and mount it to the side support arm. So we want to pull the side support arm down. Now our box differs from the factory box because we have actually 4 mounting areas instead of just the 3. And the way it mounts to this bracket, actually the bottom 2 go into holes, but the top one goes into a hole and then this slot. So make sure you're not trying to line it up with this rear hole at the top. It's actually the hole in the slot right there. You can see that. So let's work this thing up in here. And it slides right on like that. And once it slides on, you can let go of the box. It'll hold in place. And we want to take the 4 split lock washers and slide them on each of the studs. And then bolt on the 4 1/4-20 hex nuts. Remember to make sure you have the blue Loctite on the hex nuts. I go ahead and like to just get them, all 4 of them, started about a turn. And the socket size you're using for this is the 7/16. So you take the 7/16 socket and go ahead and tighten those 4 up. Okay, once we get the box mounted to the side support arm, don't forget to put this rubber dust boot back on. And you see we have a machined groove on the top and bottom half of the clamshell. You just work the rubber boot around there, just kind of spin it around until you get it to seat all the way around there. Just like that. Make sure that it seats flush against the clamshell box. Okay, here we're going to show how to install the Dynamat Extreme onto the side swing arm and on the center linkage arm. I decided to do this out on the table so that you could see. It's very dark underneath the car. It's a little difficult to see what we're doing, but it's very easy to do. Just envision this is the part here that's inside your shifter. If you look in front of that towards the engine of the car, you'll see this large silver knuckle joint. Right in front of that, closer to the engine, is a flat surface here, okay? On the swing arm, which is on the driver's side, that actually connects the side of the box, you have this long arm that goes to the front of the transmission, and you have this rod here. This area here and this area here is where we're going to apply the Dynamat. And all it does is it actually quells some of the NVH and the vibration that are coming out of the transmission so that it doesn't reach the shifter area. So we take the sheet, and all you want to do, and it's not critical how precise it is. If you want to get a tape measure, you can, or scale. But you want to cut about 1.25 inches wide strip along the short length of the Dynamat sheet. And then you want to cut that in half. Okay? Once you do that, you take one of the pieces, you peel it off, and right in the center, you just want to wrap that. And be careful, don't go this way and cut yourself on that aluminum foil. It'll cut you like a paper cut. Just wrap it just like that. Doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter if you get it down here a little bit, but try to do it neatly like that. Once we're done with that, you take the other piece, peel off the backing, and this piece you actually want to put it on like this and wrap it around, and it should almost go around. You don't want to cut the piece so long that it overlaps. Just want to wrap it around just like that, nice and neat. And that's all there is to it. Okay, now we're ready to install the rear bushing bracket. This is our new gold bracket that has the interchangeable rear pillar blocks. We're going to use the street bushing in this application. First thing we want to do is take the black RTV silicone. If you see these rectangle pads right here, we're going to put a generous amount of the RTV all over the pad. You can even cover the hole. Same thing for this side. Now when you install this on the car, make sure that the stainless plate with the 2 bolts is facing the rear of the vehicle. And when you push this up onto the car, be very careful. Don't let this hit the exhaust or the sides of the car or the drive shaft. It'll just be messy. You want to make sure that RTV silicone doesn't get everywhere. So you just want to slowly bring it up and slide it onto the 2 pins on the back of the MGW shifter. Then align the holes into the 2 studs that stick down and hold it up with one hand. And then you'll take one of the 2 6mm hex nuts from the factory, the ones that you took off the factory bracket, and go ahead and start it on one side. And once you get that screwed in a couple turns, you can release the bracket to grab the other hex nut and start it on the other side. Okay, once you get that started, you want to take your 1/4-inch drive with the 2 10-inch or the 18-inch extension with the 10mm deep well socket, and you want to screw both of the 6mm nuts all the way tight. You want to go ahead and bring them all the way up and tighten them up against the body of the car. You're not ready to go very tight on these yet, just snug. We'll come back and re-torque them down after we get the shifter on the top mounted. But there you go. Okay, now we're at the top inside the vehicle again, and this is the jar of grease that MGW provides. We're going to take some of the grease and liberally apply it to the inside of the linkage arm socket and also all over the linkage rod down below. You want to go ahead and push just about all the grease in there. We're going to leave a little tiny bit for the spring, which we'll show you in a few seconds here. But we just want to get the grease inside there, push it down in there, and as you articulate the gears the first few times, it'll actually go inside and lubricate the two half moon bushings that are inside. Alright. Okay, now we're going to do the return spring. Now our return spring has two spring end caps. We recommend using both for maximum performance, but if you think that the return to neutral is a little strong for you, you can actually take off the bottom one. That's the one that goes in first, and just use the one facing up. Do not remove the one facing up under any circumstances, or it won't perform correctly. But we recommend doing both. So what we do is, again, we take some of the grease that's left over in the jar, and you put grease on there enough so that when you put the spring cap on the one end, you flip it upside down, it doesn't fall out. And then you just go ahead and place it inside that little hole right there. And you take a little bit more of the grease, you just lubricate the top cap and put the top cap on top like that. Okay, now we're ready to mount the upper shifter. First thing we need to do is we need to pop the pivot cup onto the end of the shifter ball. Just push firmly, and it should pivot freely, but it should be snug. And now you see this hole down here. That is where this spring right here goes. So you got to make sure that you don't have it go into one of the counterbores for the bolts. And the pivot cup has to go down inside the selector cup in the transmission, so that's why it's important that you leave the transmission in neutral. So I always put my finger on that hole, just kind of glide it in, make sure it goes in, and make sure this little lip here, you just kind of get it up underneath the shifter, and then you push it down, and you got to hold it down because that spring's going to want to pop it up. You just make sure the holes are lined up. And this is where it's really nice to have somebody help you. They want to hand you these screws one at a time, and you want to just stick one in there and take your 3/16 T-handle Allen wrench, and you want to by hand start it a few threads to make sure it's going in straight. You're not cross-threading it. You want to screw it in a little bit, then grab your second screw, still pushing the shifter down, because even though you only have one screw in, it's going to pop back up, and you do the one in the front. Again, make sure you feed it in with the wrench by hand. If you feel any resistance, it means you've probably cross-threaded that bolt. So don't try to force it, or you'll tear the threads in the aluminum lower shifter box. Again, do not seat any of the bolts. Just run them down till they're almost snug, and then just back them off maybe a half turn until you get all four of them in. Seat it, and then just back it off about a half turn. You want to be able to have some movement. Now with this fourth bolt that's in the rear passenger side, it is very close to this shoulder, and you can see I've actually put this shifter in before, and you can see it just takes a little nick out of the console opening, and that's okay. It doesn't do any damage to it. But you want to take the button head screw, and when you get starting it, it's going to feel as if it won't go. Just get it straight and just keep turning, and you'll see it will actually move the shifter over as you're trying to torque it down, and it'll pop that. There you go. See, it pops that head right up underneath there and seats it. And at this point, you can start using your impact driver, and you can go ahead and seat all four of them. Then you just want to go back in case you have a weak battery on your impact driver, and just check them all with your Allen wrench. Okay, once you get it bolted down, we just want to check the operation of the shifter, make sure it moves forward and backwards easily. and then pop it back in neutral and make sure that the reverse lockout plate is working. You want to push it over and then push it up to first gear, and you want to push it over down to second gear. Now you see you want to have a little tiny gap. When it actually pulls away, it has a gap so it doesn't rattle there. But the one nice thing about our shifter is that this pin, this lockout pin, is adjustable. If you look on this side, there's a nylon lock nut right here that if you break this nut loose, you can actually rotate this pin on the driver's side. It has a little hole in it right there that you can stick a drill bit, an Allen wrench, or a little pin in, and you can screw that pin counterclockwise and make it protrude out, and you can actually fine-tune the first and second gear engagement so that there's no chance that you hit that dead zone coming into second gear where you're going into reverse. This works exactly like the factory shifter. You push down, over, and that's reverse. And when you pop it out of reverse, it immediately pops up and over. Very positive, firm action. So again, if you have, under spirited driving, if you feel like you're hitting a wall in second gear, you may have to adjust this pin slightly. Every car is a little different. We have it set on the factory to actually work on, I would say, over 90% of all cars. But if you do find that shifting hard into second gear, you feel like it's hitting a wall, this is how you rectify that. You just take this pin, you break the nut loose on this side, you turn it out a little bit, hold it in place, jam the nut back, and you're set. And then obviously, now we're ready to go ahead and put the dust boot on. Now you can see we have a new design dust boot. It has bellows and it has a new lip. We actually have a cable zip tie that we're going to zip tie this to the gold bracket to cinch it and actually seal it much better. Notice carefully that this is not symmetrical. In other words, this oval cutout is not in the center of the boot. It is closer actually to one side and a little bit closer front and back. If you look at it carefully, you want to have this oval cutout closer to the passenger side and closer to the rear of the vehicle. If you look at it carefully, you can tell that it's a little bit closer to this side, a little bit closer to here. So you orient it front to back that way. And you basically just want to grab your hands just like this so that you can really stretch open that boot. And you flip it down. And just to show you, it has got to go around the reverse lockout plate, okay? So you stretch it really hard, get it around, and then stretch it. And there's a groove in the bottom here. The easiest way to do it is once you get it around is reach your fingers inside the oval cutout and go ahead and stretch it so that it snaps around that boot, that groove. Okay, and once you get that done, you just want to, there you go, pull the boot around so it's flush with the top of the gold bracket. Okay, now we're ready to seat the outside lip of the boot into the tunnel of the car. And as you can see, this shifter boot, just like the factory boot, has a groove right at the base of it. And what you want to do is you want to have the wide part on the underside of the tunnel and the narrow part to flap on the top and go right around that groove. So you just want to work it slowly all the way around. And the boot is designed to be larger than the opening. So it's going to feel like it won't work properly until you get the entire boot seated all the way around, and then it'll just pop into place and you'll be happy with the way it seals. Once you get it worked all the way around and it feels like it's laying flat, we need to jump back underneath the car and inspect it from the underside. We want to make sure that that bottom flap is sitting perfectly flat against the underside of the vehicle. If it's curled up or bunched up or just flared out and it's not sitting, you're not going to get a good seal and you're going to get excessive road noise in the cockpit of the car, which is a common complaint when people install aftermarket shifters and do not install the dust boot back properly, even the OEM style one. So it's very important that you take your time with this step, push it in slowly, work your fingers around it, and you will definitely feel when the boot is seated properly. You'll just feel it kind of flare out and it'll work fine. So there we go. Let's go back underneath the car and we'll check to see if it's seated properly. Okay, we're under the vehicle, and as you can see, the passenger side of the boot is not seated properly. It's curled up there, and that's going to let excessive road noise in. So if you're having trouble trying to seat the boot and you're not getting any luck getting it right, you will have to resort to lowering the gold rear bushing bracket down by taking the nuts and dropping them down to the very bottom of the stud. Do not remove them, but let the back end of the shifter drop down far enough where you can get the boot seated properly, which we're going to do right now. Okay, here you see after massaging the boot up top a little bit and lowering the rear bushing bracket, we were able to get the flange to lay perfectly flat. This is how you want to do it. You inspect all the way around. You see that the boot doesn't have any crimps in it or any bows. So we can go ahead now and re-tighten the rear gold bushing bracket, and then go ahead and put the MGW supplied nylon lock nuts on top of those. Okay, we're going to tighten up the rear bushing bracket permanently now. And remember, this is just a small 6mm stud that's welded to the underside of the car. Do not go crazy with your ratchet tightening up this nut, or you will either snap that stud off or strip it out. So you just want to kind of use wrist pressure, tighten it up, go over to the other side, repeat it, bring it all the way up. Once it's snug, just like maybe a little 1/8 of a turn to a 1/4 of a turn, tighten it up. Again, don't go crazy. What we do now is we actually provide these small little 6mm nylock lock nuts, and we'll jam these up against the factory nuts, and that'll provide additional vibration support for those brackets so that you don't have to get so tight on them. And all you want to do on those is just bring them up flush against the underside of the nuts and just torque them very lightly. Just a little twist right at the end is all you need. Make sure, another tip is to make sure you pull back on the socket so that you're not grabbing the nut that's already seated. You want to just be tightening the lock nut, because it will go over both of them and you'll be trying to tighten them both up at the same time. There you go, and then you can just want to re-inspect the boot, and again we can see that it's nice and sealed. Looks good. Okay, we're ready to put the heat shield on. First we need to go ahead and put the sound and heat barrier onto the stainless heat shield. So we peel off the protective coating, and then we lay the heat shield down with the tabs facing down like that. And you'll see that this heat shield matches this cutout here, and you line up the bolts holes. So we're going to peel off this protective coating, and it's got an adhesive backing on it. And you just want to line up the holes, and before you put it down, make sure they're lined up. And just carefully, okay. And then you want to fold it around like that. Make sure it sticks like that. Okay, and then this tab here, when we... Okay, now we're going to put the heat shield, and the heat shield has the 2 slits in it that faces the front of the vehicle, and when it's placed in there properly, the tabs on the heat shield point down to follow the contour of the tunnel. So you want to take it like this and slide it around so that you see the shiny part, and then we just are going to line up the bolts Get all 4 of them lined up. There we go. And just hold it in place with one of your hands. And the kit comes with 4 3/8/16 lock nuts. Just get a couple of them started by hand. Okay, now the 2 on the passenger side, you can use your double extensions with your 1/2-inch deep well socket, and you can get to them. So you can go ahead and tighten those up nice and snug. Okay. Now the 2 on the driver's side, you're not going to be able to reach with the socket because the drive shaft's kind of offset. So it's best to get a 1/2-inch ratcheting box wrench like this. You can actually reach up there, even though you can't get a good lot of travel. You can reach up in there and get these started by hand first. Just get up in there and go ahead and tighten those up. Okay, once the heat shield is firmly in place, you're just going to reach up in here. Careful not to cut yourself, and just grab this front tab and just bend it down about maybe 30 degrees. All that does is clear the linkage square right here on the linkage arm. Okay, now that we have the dust boot sealed on the bottom, we're going to go ahead and seal it around the gold dampener bracket. Just want to take the supplied zip tie, make sure it's underneath the little lip there on the rubber dust boot. And I like to get the end of the zip tie right down at about the 7 o'clock position. Gives you the most torque to tighten down tight. Then you just take a pair of scissors and get really, really close. You don't want to have it looking like that, because that actually can cut into the boot when you're shifting. You actually want to get the scissors right up against it there. And we'll even cut it a little tiny bit. There we go. That. Okay, now if you're going to reuse your factory shift knob, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to first take everything off. Now we ship it with the lock nut on the outside, or the jam nut on the outside, just to keep everything in place. But actually when you mount it, everything's going to be reversed. The nut's going to go onto the shaft first, then your split lock washer, then your flat smooth washer. The smooth flat washer is so that you don't scar up the gold anodized part of the vibration isolator. So you screw that in there. You can go ahead and seat it down pretty good. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our factory knob, and since the factory knob and this knob are not timed on the threads, you're not going to be sure which way the logo is going to orient. So what you want to do is you want to turn the shift knob down until it stops. And tighten it down as tight as you can get it by hand. And you may want to put a tiny little bit of blue Loctite or some white plumber's Teflon tape on there to keep it tight, but you tighten it down as tight as you can. And then what you want to do is take this 3/4 inch wrench, break the jam nut loose down below so that the whole knob turns. And then you can line up the shift knob, hold the shift knob in place, and then tighten the jam nut. That way you know when you put the boot back on, okay, you got it tight, and then you take the shift knob off, because you have to take it off to put the console on. But now you know when you screw it back on there, it'll be oriented correctly. And if you happen to get it off a little bit, it'll just require lifting the console back off, aligning it. Okay, now we're ready to put back all of the sound pads. This is the factory one. It goes on first. You put it on. Make sure you slide the pad all the way down, and that hole should come through there. As such. Then you want to take the MGW pad. As you can see, it's got slits in it, there and there. It goes over, and those same studs in the rear will push through there, and then you work the front part all the way down underneath the console like that, and then this piece comes over, and this little connector there slides onto that stud there, and then your connector for your hazard light and your trunk release snaps back on that stud there, and this little white connector goes back into its place. Now this little washer here, a lot of people ask us what it's for. The only reason this washer is here is on some of the consoles that have a little plastic trim ring. It just keeps it from rattling against that. So this washer actually just sets right. You don't have it pushed all the way down there. You actually just have it setting just like that. Okay, now we're ready to put the console back on. Again, you have your switch right here that slides into this connector right there. And I always pop the trunk just to make sure the connector's working properly before I button everything up. And you have to slide this thing in. First thing you want to do is you want to get the shift knob shaft onto the boot so you don't tear the boot. Because if you have it like this and you go forcing it down, you could rip that right through the boot. So get the thing on first, and then slide the two front pins into the console and carefully work it from front to rear. Snaps in place, and make sure that it's seated flush. If you feel like something's keeping it from pushing down, you probably have some wires crimped up underneath or something's in the way, so lift it up, don't force it down. Once you get that snapped into place, you can go ahead and close the rear glove box, and you're ready to put the shift knob on. And we have chosen to put one of MGW's new contoured race knobs on. This is a very grippy material. It's got a good feel to it. It comes with all sorts of Ford licensed logos. This is a Laguna Seca version Boss, so it's got the Laguna Seca logo on top. We have all the others, the Ponies, the Cobras, the GT, the gear shift pattern, and the regular Boss 302 logos on them. So we're going to go ahead and screw this down on top of the threads, pushing down the collar. Get it down so it's snug. And then when we line up the logo, it comes with an 1/8" Allen key. It has a locking screw in the front of the shift knob, so you can torque it down, and the knob is locked into place. Now you just want to go ahead and go through the gears, push it down, make sure reverse works, pops out nice and cleanly, and we're ready to test drive the vehicle.